Beyonce said, let's keep repeating that one. So we put it on repeat, and she starts writing. And, it was kind of a typical day in the recording studio.
Welcome to Music Career Therapy, brought to you by artistmanagers.io. This podcast is your guide to surviving and thriving in the music business. We interview artists, managers, producers, publishers, and more, all offering a wealth of knowledge and experience in navigating the music business without sacrificing mental health. Whether you're just starting out or looking for new ways to grow your existing career, thanks for joining us on Music Career Therapy. Welcome to Music Career Therapy. I'm your host, Michael Winger. Our guest today is Dan Workman. Dan has had an illustrious career as a recording engineer, record producer, and now is a trained psychotherapist who specializes in working with people that identify as creatives. So to get started, just so we can get to know you better, as a producer and engineer, I know you've worked with a lot of amazing clients. Can you give us a quick rundown of some of the people you've worked with?
Yeah, well, I was very fortunate. I spent most of my career working in Houston, Texas, and so I worked on a wide variety of different artists. I wasn't known in one genre. I didn't make the same record over and over all my life, which I think is good. Just to start at the top, I was fortunate enough to work with Destiny's Child early in their career on their second and third record. I worked with Beyonce on her first record. I built a recording studio for Billy Gibbons of ZZ Top and staffed that for 3 years and got a chance to do some tour work with them, which is amazing. I've worked with Clay Walker, South Park Mexican, Paul Wall, Lyle Lovett, and a ton of other people that you know and don't know.
Wow. Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that, and thanks for joining us, too. As you know, this podcast is called Music Career Therapy, and our goal is to discuss a lot of the challenges that artists and music professionals go through while working in the music business, and especially focused on mental health. So, first of all, what caused you to switch from producing to becoming a therapist?
Well, this is really funny because originally I was in grad school to be a clinical psychologist in the early 1980s or mid 1980s, and I dropped out and pursued a music career. So really, I'm actually returning to my first thought of love of doing therapy and being of service in that way. But yeah, the joke was, as working as an engineer producer, was that I was the guy that had a degree in psychology, and I didn't try to front with that. I think that it became a joke because I had a knack for working with difficult people and getting good performances. And I realized that I was kind of using some of the nascent skills and some of the things that I'd learned before I dropped out of grad school, and was kind of proud to have that sort of ability to kind of reach past the normal, do it again or find your motivation or let's get high, and actually try to work with somebody to get a good performance.
Being a producer myself, I'm very familiar with that line between what the psychology of the work is as opposed to the technical or just hanging out with people.
It's really weird, working with people in the recording studio or for a performance, a musical performance, you're taking somebody who's trying to manifest a dream in their mind. Hopefully they have some sort of an idea of what they want to do, what they want to be, the story they want to tell. And if they were able to do it perfectly, they wouldn't need you. They just fire up GarageBand and make a hit record. So it became obvious to me that there was a lot more going on than just trying to get somebody to sing on pitch or to, not have snot in their nose. Or I think a lot about singing because that to me was the most difficult challenge. I mean, I can't intonate somebody like I can intonate a guitar, or I can't, mess with an amplifier to get a better sound. Singers literally live in their instrument. And so that became sort of a passion of mine. And at first, it was the biggest chore. Working with a singer that wasn't all that good was just the biggest nightmare. And I slowly realized, wait a second, there's a human in there, and let's deal with that at the same time. And so it was very much like a therapeutic experience. And now, working with my patients who are creatives, I let those 34 years sort of inform it.
So you're focused specifically on working with creative people. What brought you to that path, and how do you approach this work?
First of all, I had an advisor that said, hey, you need to figure out, the population of people you want to work with, because it's a big world out there, and usually people, they have a specific population they want to work with. And it came to me as many of my best music ideas came to me in the shower. It was like, wait a second, there's a lot of creative people that need therapy. And I think that might be a connection that I can make, like a human to human connection, using sort of my knowledge and understanding of the creative process is a way to do therapy. And there's something else that's interesting. I'm a psychodynamic therapist, meaning that I look at, like, how did somebody get here? What was their learned experiences that grew up? What were their formative experiences? What were the sort of the assets and talents and wounds that they sort of learned before they had a choice at being a human? And how is that manifesting now? So that's a very creative process to begin with, like to be able to listen to someone's story, start to find that golden thread from the past to present, and then find a way to affect behavioral change through basically insight. And so the process itself is creative. And I may be shooting way past the answer to your question, so I'll pause and see if I'm making sense or if you need clarification or keep going.
Working with creative people, as much as we both have over the years, it's always clear that it's a mental game. How much does your practice overlap with people's career needs as much as it does with their personal and emotional needs?
That's a really good question. So when I'm working with somebody that is a creative, I'm not necessarily sort of giving them an assignment to go write a song or bring me a picture or write me a poem. Sometimes that can be part of the work, but that's not the focus of my work. I'm not a therapist or like a music therapist or art therapist. What will happen is sometimes people will come to me specifically for a creative problem. And I had a patient early in my career that was a Broadway actress, and she started to freeze up on stage and forget her lines. That was the presenting problem. And oddly enough, we found some things that were very formative in her early life that were really resonating and were being triggered by having to perform, doing the thing that she's the best at. And so that was very much focused, at least on the beginning, of the mechanics of her creative process. A lot of people, they tell me they knit or they're really good, like a computer programmer. I don't knit. I know nothing about computer programming other than I appreciate good programming. And so I don't meet them on the ground level of their creative tasks or the way that they work. But it sometimes, not sometimes, it almost always comes up in some respect. I can say a little bit more about how I get to that place, but once again, I tend to warm to the task pretty quickly, and so I don't want to shoot past your question.
I think most artists have some kind of mental health challenges. I'm someone with ADHD, and many, almost most, if not all of my friends seem to at least show up with that. Are you seeing with artists that there are certain types of things that are more common than others? And what sort of issues do you see music artists in particular having to work through?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned ADHD. A lot of my patients have attention deficit problems, ADHD, ADD. And as a matter of fact, the last two messages I got before I turned my phone off were referrals of two people for me specifically who are creative and presented with ADHD. So it's a thing. The things that I find, like working with creatives, and let's talk about musicians for a moment, because that's the thing that you and I have in common and will make for an easier conversation. So for musicians, they are performative creatives. They're not sort of creating code that only a few people will see, and the attaboys come from just like, getting paid and knowing they've done this amazing job in front of their team. We're performative. We're communicators. We want to make people feel things. And so there is an interesting thing that I've noticed that happens to performers, specifically musicians especially. And they, in order to be somebody on the stage and to be that person, it removes you from the normal sort of world of society in some way. That there's a reason there's a stage, there's a reason there's lights focused on it, there's a reason your voice is amplified, and it's because you're different. And your magic power is that you can make people feel things, whether it is, I want to get in the pit and mess some stuff up, whether it is, I want to go like hang out and make lots of money and smoke lots of dope. If I feel so in love, oh my gosh, I want to dance and can't stop. and then all the more complex feelings underneath that of a great symphony, or something that moves you through a lot of stages of feelings. Well, what happens is that can alienate you from the people around you. And especially if you're a young person with a talent and like you start to get noted for that talent early on, you are treated differently than your peers, maybe of your siblings. Maybe if you have a parent that's really behind you being a saxophone player, you start to feel some pressure. So you're taught from the beginning or by the experience of being a performer that you're a little bit different and that not everybody understands. And so a whole host of issues can sort of find that as a place to provide dysfunction. That idea of never being enough, that idea of being an imposter, they seem to be such common themes with performers, right? Like how can, Barbra Streisand feel like she's not enough? And by the way, I don't know if she feels that way or not, but somebody that is publicly adored and people will pay money and stand in line for hours to go see, how can they feel, inadequate or suicidal or drink too much? Well, the tale as old as time. They do, and they seem to do so with perhaps a higher degree of incidence than just in the normal community. So there's other things that happen to artists that can kind of find a way to come out in dysfunctional personality traits or dysfunctional ways of thinking. And then for those of us that have a wide variety of feelings in ourselves, we may have mood disorders, or there are people who learn to multitask and literally their chemistry takes over and manifests as ADHD. It's always a subtle blend between nature and nurture, like what's your wiring, what's your chemistry, and then what you're exposed to, how you've lived.
I've been fascinated lately with the topics of neurodiversity and especially autism and ADHD, because it seems that the music business has both of those profiles showing up frequently. I'm curious how, as a therapist, if you have had experience so far with those kinds of profiles, and what ways do people learn that they're on the spectrum of either ADHD or autism? Like, how might they discover that if they're an adult? Because I know that's a big challenge now. Like, it's easier to diagnose it when they're a kid. It seems like that even just being recognized for that is tricky for artists.
It really is. And it kind of goes back to what I was talking about previously. Somebody can be sort of a savant on their instrument, like be way more advanced than their training, and yet not a very good communicator. I can think of some jazz musicians who would famously get mad at the audience because they wouldn't be quiet. Keith Jarrett, I'm calling you out, Keith Jarrett. So now that we understand what neurodiversity is, and literally autism is now autism spectrum disorder. So we understand there's like a vast spectrum of how this manifests, from the profoundly autistic, which is caught very easily, very early because it's so severe, to adults now who are reading about neurodiversity, and maybe their wife will go like, you need to read this because I think, I've had people that show up that way. I have a patient, I'm going to speak anonymously as much as I can right now, who is quite a creative in his field, not music, and basically was having issues at work with a family member that was working with this person. And they came in saying, like, we think it's ASD. We're reading all about it. And sure enough, like the symptoms that were manifested pointed towards either some sort of a mild autism spectrum disorder in an adult, which is very difficult to diagnose, just with certainty, or also the effects of trauma, like severe ongoing trauma as a child can manifest as a problem with neurodiversity. They look very, very similar, and the treatment is kind of different. So it's stuff as behavioral health professionals we're kind of figuring out. There's people that are doing really great research. But yes, working with creatives, like, neurodiversity almost is a word that has no meaning, because most people come to manifest their talents. And usually I see the ones that are really far into it. And there is a certain amount of dysfunction around either attention or one's ability to track information or emotions around them. Once again, I'm kind of at a disadvantage because I'm writing a book at the same time. I'm putting this together with you, so I have probably too much information. So be sure to interrupt me or dial me back if I start to kind of go off the track.
Oh, you're doing great. And I'd love to check out that book when you finish it. I know that anyone who discovers something deep about themselves, like a diagnosis of some type of neurodiversity, can be a really challenging moment. So how do you start someone's journey when they're first learning about a diagnosis of ADHD or autism?
That's a real good question. So I try to stay away from diagnosis unless a patient is very, very interested in it. Or it seems to me after starting the work that it would be useful, even if it's challenging. One of the reasons is that diagnosis really became very, very important because we needed an insurance company to pay for like the treatment. And so for them, it's like, is this a cut on your finger or your thumb? Is it a stubbed toe or is it a broken shoulder? Well, the way the metric is set up, they will provide a certain amount of therapy or treatment and very specific treatments depending on like what the disorder is from the DSM-5. You know, your code is there. There's your diagnosis. Very frustrating because a lot of people, they're proud that they know, like they kind of front with their diagnosis as a part of their identity. That's fine. Matter of fact, it could be really helpful. It can also be kind of not all that good for somebody that sort of like hides behind this thing. Hey, everybody should be nice to me because I'm this thing. So I try to keep it out of the conversation as much as possible with those two caveats. It could be useful. But we're doing the same work. And then sometimes if somebody needs medication, I don't prescribe, so I need to work with a psychiatrist or a medical doctor. And so it becomes a little bit more obvious that we're doing something. And then there's some diagnoses people are simply not afraid of. You tell somebody they're ADHD, they're like, thank God. Like this, I needed to know that I was ADHD. And you speak of your own journey. I have my own. One of the things that attracted me to this profession was I had a really great experience as a teenager in therapy. And I'll remember when somebody told me, you've got a mood disorder. And I was like, what's that? And they were like, well, this, and this, and this that you tell me about all the time, like most people's mood don't fluctuate as quickly or as severely. You know, the bandwidth is really high for you. And after I went through a few mood swings, like hearing that information, you know, I realized like, oh my gosh, this validates something for me. Like, you know, now I know what's been happening to me and why. It helps me find out the treatment. So in that case, it was really good for me to hear it. The funny thing is I kind of forgot it. And then, you know, all good therapists are seeing therapists, right? I mean, we need to be tuned up in order to like do what we do for a living. Therapist is adult go like, this is very linked to your mood disorder. And it was just like, you know, the elevator drop. Boom. That's right. I've heard this before. Boom. All this stuff comes together, you know, and I was both grateful and horrified, but it's been so much better. It's helped me understand. And therapists are really crummy therapists to themselves. So like, this helped me bring somebody else in on the project and also kind of validates what I do. You know, it's like, you know, even producers in the studio, Daniel Lynn Watts says, man, I need somebody to tell me, you know, when I'm playing, I need somebody to tell me.
Well, I was just thinking that.
Yeah, for sure. We can't produce ourselves.
Yeah. No. I was like, you can't produce yourself. There's no way.
This happens to me over and over. 100%. I still record, I still perform, and I still need somebody to tell me what to do. Like when it's my turn to do it.
Having been on both sides of the glass, you know, I was an artist before I was a producer, and same thing. I think once you start producing, there becomes this temptation to produce yourself, and the results are never as good as they would be if someone external can tell you what you could do better. Like you'll never be your best self without having someone else.
Dude, we'd be like Jeremy Irons in Dead Ringers, writing his own prescriptions, you know, and just like totally, you know, going totally off the rails, you know, like it gets worse and worse, you know, they won't fill his prescriptions anymore.
Well, to go back to something else you were talking about earlier, we've been through a lot in the music business over the last half a year. Trauma is a real issue for a lot of musicians and artists. I'm wondering in your practice or your colleagues, how trauma affects artists.
Yeah, well, you're referring to a subject that's so big that it's very humbling to even think about. First of all, trauma is a weird thing because there's two people in a burning house and they both get out after a great ordeal. one of them kind of shakes it off and, goes on, gratefully got out of the fire, and that's about it. And the other one is altered, not in a good way, and has some great burdens placed on them just in their psychic mechanism. It's really harder to be them after that experience. COVID introduced the whole world to those situations. And then just the world has become sort of a weird, raw place as we learn to process hearing things from people that we never really wanted to listen to or see. And a lot of information is shuffled at us. And as a result, there's almost a trauma injury of too much information. I think one of the good byproducts of that is that we're now seeing things that were hidden in our society. And I think it's particularly poignant for marginalized populations, whether it be over their sexual identity, their religion, their color, race, or creed. I have to really sort of level set before I say anything more. Being an older white dude almost disqualifies me from representing the people I'm going to claim to represent in these statements. But one of the things that I've found that is good is that now this is exposed. It's no longer internalized trauma. It's no longer the person of color who is experiencing like internal racism because it's what they grew up around. And even though they don't like it and know it's wrong, it's changed them. I can't imagine what that must be like. I can't imagine what it's like to stand in line at the DPS and have the person treat you different than the one standing in front of me. And I can't imagine what it's like to try to get in to see your husband at a hospital in a place that does not recognize same-sex marriage with a lot of inclusivity. Your name is different. You're not a family member. You can't come in. So I don't have the place to put all of that stuff. And at least we're talking about it. So instead of it being internalized and shut down or kind of a side conversation between a few people you think may understand, it's an issue that we're all grappling with, and it's very disruptive and very heartbreaking. But I think that we have to go through that in order to start making some headway. And my degree is actually in social work. I'm a licensed clinical social worker trained in dynamic psychotherapy. And so I come from a place of trying to address these issues like on the ground. And so in my practice, it's a very overt thing. That's a long spiel. Sorry to be talkative. It's coffee kicking in, but I think that kind of addresses what you're talking about.
Therapy's not inexpensive, and I'm just wondering if you can recommend any resources for people who don't have the funds, especially artists who are out on the road and living off of $10 a day between shows. What resources can you recommend to artists who maybe aren't able to afford a therapist?
Okay, so I'm really passionate about this subject. So there's a couple of things that come to mind. Number one, get the best referral you can to the best practitioner that's licensed where you live. So I can work with people all over the world as long as they have a Texas address. That's where my license is, but I can be a telehealth. It's something that's kind of opened up as a result of the pandemic times, is that it has been more accepted that, hey, you can work with a person who is tethered in some way to the state that your license is in. Find the best one you can, and then call them up, even if they don't take insurance, and just ask them, hey, I'm willing to pay, but what do you take a sliding scale? Will you accept a sliding scale patient? And if so, what is that? If you don't ask, you won't get. So don't think automatically that you're marginalized. Talk to someone, find out about them, and ask. I have a certain number of slots on my calendar every week that are going to be my sliding scale patients. I can't take every one, but I know the ones that I can. And it makes me feel good. It's like I'm able to give back to some people that went through some circumstances that I went through. So don't try to look at the limitations first. Find the best person. The other things you can do are, obviously, if you have a critical acute need, like I'm feeling suicidal, National Suicide Hotline is actually really good. It's super easy to find. You can either get it by calling 911 and they'll hook you up, or you can just go online and say suicide hotline and you will find it. Those people are actually very, very well trained. So for an acute need, that's great. Also, if you find yourself somebody with a mental health difference where they may have psychotic breaks or something, go to the nearest like managed care center. Like whether it's just a doc in the box emergency room or emergency room to a hospital, they can't turn you away for an acute need. So, it's hard to do, but you can do that. So now that we've got those out of the way, there's some other sort of layers. One is the wild world of telehealth has really opened things up. So you can find online some amazing resources where you can find somebody to talk to you who is a counselor or a licensed counselor, and they make all the friction go away. You may have to work to find somebody that's a good fit, but you're going to find somebody to talk to. And a lot of times that first layer of intervention, just finding somebody to listen to you and then offer either an ear or some insight, really, really will help. Now, this is where it gets controversial because there's a lot of therapists on TikTok right now. And some of them, not all, some of them are really freaking good. Like I'm really amazed. Like I have to open my mind up and go that's really helpful. So that is accessible. Yes, not everybody that says they're a therapist or a counselor on TikTok is worth listening to, but that's also the same in any type of licensure. You can call people here in Houston and find somebody that kind of questions like, how did they get licensed? But don't use the resource. And then there's other institutionalized now companies that hook people up for online counseling. And I'm not going to mention any names because just turn on NPR, you're going to hear them. They're both awesome in the sense that they offer a brand new way to find yourself into a therapeutic relationship. And there's a lot of growing pains. Finally, there's AI, artificial intelligent chatbots that are coming up that actually kind of make some people feel better and will be helpful. And while that is not standardized, you'll start to see it more, I think, in the next 5 years with supervision, like a human behind it as they refine the algorithms, because a lot of times that may be what somebody needs right then and right there. So there's a lot available to somebody that has a need. I have right now one musician in Houston that just contacted me, and it's like, I don't know if I'm going to be the guy or not, but I'm working with them to find the right resource. And people that do what I do, we normally really want to try to help the person that calls or gets in touch. We want to see them get the right resources, even if it's not us.
Yeah, that's so great to hear. I know that that's a thing, just pro bono work and sliding scales for a lot of different industries, but it's great to hear that that's something. And of course you would do that because you're such a good guy.
Oh,
a couple other questions. You were talking earlier about how differently artists live just by nature of being the special ones. And obviously everyone's different, but in coping with anxiety, what are some skills or tricks that can help people who have anxiety alleviate some of their challenges?
Anxiety and depression are the two biggies. Those are the things that tend to present, even if there's a more complex problem going on. I'm anxious or I don't want to get out of bed. And so there are some really awesome things you can do, and they are not very well received, but they are tried and true. About 20 to 40 minutes of cardio exercise 3 times a week will radically alter your limbic system and endocrine system and will help reset you. It's like crying, boo-hoo-hoo. It really resets you emotionally. So it will help. Getting enough sleep. How long and under what circumstances can you sleep where you feel refreshed? How much is that? It's different for different people, but that's your target. You need to do that 5 days a week, 5 nights a week. Eating healthy food that is not processed or least processed can be incredibly good. So those are things that are just sort of like lay in there. Usually they do things, I can't afford good food, I don't have the time, and like you don't understand, I've got an infant and I don't sleep. So I get it. I have the same resistance myself. it's really funny. I mean, I talk to medical doctors and behavioral health people all the time, and we all just kind of nod and say yes. Even if we won't do it, it's astonishing how well the body works when you actually do the things to take care of it and to sort of like move it and treat it the way that is optimal. So that's not always available to everybody, and not everybody's open to that. We live in a world where the solutions look more sort of like a pill or talking or intellectual insight. For me, meditation and yoga, like I started doing yoga when I'm 51. I still do it. I'm 65. It's changed my life. I move differently than other people my age. Nothing spectacular, but it's like it doesn't hurt me to bend over, And so I'll stop there. I won't go on to be that guy at the party that won't shut up about yoga. And then I'll move to the other thing I won't shut up about, and that is meditation. I tell my patients, meditate a minute, no more. Not allowed. Do not meditate any more than a minute. And it can be any way you like, laying down, standing up, sitting down, cross-legged. You can listen to music. You can listen to a meditation tape. You can do ASMR. I don't care what it is. Do it for 1 minute a day. And then let's see if you can get into the habit. If you can't do a minute a day, we're probably wasting our time here trying to get to meditation. But man, it quiets the mind in a way that is not immediately detectable. Like most people don't pop up from their 10th meditation session and go like, whoa, yeah, it's a different thing. It's more subtle. It's more sort of like, how was it this month? Now that you've been doing this 3 months, you're like, it has been easier to be me. Like, let's say if the ADHD person, I still have to medicate my mind in order for my thoughts to have focus, but I am not running and chasing rabbit trails near as much as I was before. So those are the things. And obviously, therapy is good. Medication can be really good. But it's just funny how some of the really most fantastic ones are really very, very easy to do, or at least it doesn't require a prescription to start sleeping an extra hour a night.
Well, that's great advice. And it goes back to the earlier question of what can you do that doesn't cost a lot of money just when you're trying to take care of yourself. One hot topic of discussion these days, what is the current status amongst mental health professionals about psychedelics and how new medicines are coming available as that's becoming a little bit more open of a topic?
I will resist the urge to represent the entire behavioral community with my answer. So I'll just kind of bust it down to my own experience. It's really funny. So going back into psychedelic research, which started in the 60s, there was always this big push to use psychedelics as a part of behavioral health treatments. It's in the literature. This is nothing new. What's happened is that all of that kind of fell off as it became federally Schedule I narcotic. So it became very, very difficult to do the research. People were kind of ostracized. People wanted to distance themselves from that, universities, people that were doing research. And then it's made reappearances over the years. Right now, it is at a real heyday because we're seeing legalization of cannabis, psychoactive drugs that are plant-based, and amongst that psilocybin. And then ayahuasca is getting a lot of people looking at that. There's this idea that something that's plant-based is different fundamentally and safer than things that have to be synthesized in an illegal lab, like MDA or LSD. So there's research that's now sifting to the top. It's becoming sort of more acceptable. There's people that actually have practices around ketamine now. It's being used rather widely. Here, at least here in Houston, there are several clinics that you can go to. It's used mostly for treatment-resistant depression. And there is research that says, hey, this is working. So that all looks good to me. And there are people with anecdotal experiences using psychedelics that go like, hey, this was an integrative moment for me. Like I realized that there's a lot more to the world, and it made me feel a little less afraid of who I am. I've had, a handful of patients that have done ketamine infusions, Now you can do this ketamine at home thing that social media is rolling at everybody, and I have a patient that's doing that. I can tell you that I've seen it change things, and in some for the better. And then I've seen some that it hasn't worked. I guess personally, my opinion is that I like the fact that this has been included. This is now a tool that we can reach for with some legitimacy, because I think that one of the things that's really sort of awesome about being a human being is being able to be mindful and aware and really notice like the miracles that are just littered all around us. That tree out there, man, it's doing photosynthesis. We know exactly how that works, and we don't know why it ever started, but boy, it's this amazing thing. You know, I got a practice partner who's getting ready to have a baby. Really, we know how that happens, but it's like the fact that it does is a pretty amazing thing. So, living a life of sort of wonderment and like curiosity is super healthy, and it helps with things like depression. The psychedelic experience takes somebody out of their normal sensory comfort zone. And while that can be disorienting and unpleasant to some, it can also be a reminder. It's like, there is so much more going on here than what our mind is used to processing. And that can be a real empowering thought. And, musicians, and there's a reason that we're attracted to things that sort of alter our consciousness. It's because that's what we do for other people. We alter their mood, their consciousness, and make them feel things. So I think it's real natural, and I'm all for it, and responsible use and all. And, just sort of the disclaimer that it is really good to do this facilitated with a practitioner, somebody that's trained and licensed to do it, is optimal experience. But in general, I think that it's getting more interesting to be a human being, and this is just one way to sort of burn that in and celebrate it.
I was hoping you'd say that.
I feel like I'm saying too much. Holy crap. I mean, I'm very at ease as we speak, and these are topics I'm pretty passionate about.
Yeah, and I'm very curious about too, so I'm glad we're having the conversation. To wrap us up, just because it's fun to hear stories, and you've had a long career in the music business, but in terms of crazy experiences, do you have any favorite stories of your days being a producer?
Oh, man. It's so funny. Like the second you mention that, the ones that come to the top of the pile are ones that I could never say. Like I just sworn to secrecy. Governments would topple if I mentioned it. So we'll move underneath those. I guess one of the coolest things I witnessed as an engineer is when I was working with Destiny's Child. It got on the third album to where it was pretty much Kelly Rowland and Beyonce coming into the studio and working initially on these tracks. At this point, they're kind of producing themselves. And they brought in the beat that was to become Bootylicious, which was The Edge of 17 from Fleetwood Mac or Stevie Nicks. I can't remember which one it was. This is the sample. And I heard that they were like listening to all these different beats that people had made, and that one came on, and I was like, that is clever. That is really cool. And so Beyonce said, let's keep repeating that one. So we put it on repeat, and she starts writing. And, it was kind of a typical day in the recording studio. Well, about 45 minutes later, it was like time to get on the mic. And she busted out the first chorus to Bootylicious. And it was unbelievable. And so the first thing we did was flesh out the chorus, which of course is many different parts, many different harmonies. Beyonce singing a lot, Kelly singing a lot, and the flow state happens, like the thing that you're going to give up food, sleep, and sex. It's focused. Everybody's in the room, and time is just passing somewhere else. It's a different planet. We get it all kind of put together, and she had everything. She had the bridge, she had the verses, all of the different little parts in between, the sort of the Michael Jackson expressions and stuff. And at the end of the day, it had been a 14-hour session before I left, which is long for me. And it's done. And so I deliver to Matthew Knowles, her dad. And I knew that I'd witnessed something amazing. There was very few times where it was like, that's a hit record. Like I hadn't had that feeling too many times. And it was like, that's going to be on the radio. That is awesome. And at the time, it was all about female empowerment, having a big booty, right? Or more booty than normal. And making a cool song about that. And so I saw the wisdom. This was even the second record when it was Bills, Bills, Bills and Say My Name. It was all about, hey, recognize me or I can take care of myself. And so I get a call from Matthew the next day, and he goes like, I heard that song. And I said, yeah, it is amazing. He goes, what's the title of that song? And I said, Bootylicious. And he goes, no. I mean, literally on the phone. No, man, too much. And I was like, Matthew, like, listen to the lyrics, listen to the song. I know it's kind of provocative, but this is a hit song. And what's more, it's important. It's about women feeling good about themselves. And he's like, no, man, no. And so I did not convince him, but somebody at Sony did. And, it was one of the first singles released from that record. And to this day, blows me away, because I got the chance to see it just happen organically with people that were talented way above the gifts of even very talented people. And I saw it happen. Now, one regret, at the end of the day, I threw away the lyric sheets. Like, what was I thinking? Literally. But I was so exhausted. I remember thinking, like, I should save these. I was like, no, I'm out of here. And so I wish I'd done that. I wish I'd saved them. And a lot of people worked on those records. I'm sure they got reworked a zillion different ways, but that felt very personal. Like, I got a chance to have my hands on that with them working, and then it came out. It was just really cool. An irreplaceable moment for me.
Yeah. Filled with a trauma moment by throwing those lyrics away.
Yeah, not even low key, man. It's quite a regret. I wish I had them.
That's a great story. That's amazing. I'm sure you have many more, and perhaps we will have you back on as we go through more moments of learning about mental health.
I'm honored, Michael. Thank you so much. I mean, this is an interesting opportunity that you would have a podcast about sort of like the confluence of taking care of yourself and being a musician. And I'm very passionate about both. And so I'm really honored to be asked and to be on here with you.
Well, it's great having you, and thank you, Dan. And thank you for listening. On our next episode, we'll be talking with Dion Liverpool, former manager for A Tribe Called Quest and professor of hip-hop composition at Emory University in Atlanta. You've been listening to Music Career Therapy, brought to you by artistmanagers.io. See you next time.